Jane Unchained Live Talk. We have an extraordinary broadcast for you right now. We've got two people from Denmark talking about the mink massacre. 17 million mink because they have manifested a COVID mutation. And in New York, we have famed animal activist Donnie Moss and Bonnie Clapper, a former prosecutor who has now devoted her life to stopping the horrors of animal agriculture. We've also got Dr. Desmond in Liberia, who's an infectious disease expert. Now, this is the horror that we are addressing right now. Denmark killing right now as we speak 17 million mink after discovering this mutated virus. Before we go any further, let's take a short look at a very short video that Casper in Denmark brought us that will, it's a punch to the gut, but it's a short video. Watch. Brings tears to my eyes. What have we become? Casper, what ran through your heart as you brought us, as you documented this incredible horror, this unspeakable horror inflicted on innocent animals? Tell us.
It's difficult to express what I felt there. When I went there, it's almost a month ago now. Actually, it was in the middle of October, and I thought it was when it all peaked. They started talking about it in the news in Denmark, and there was some footage in the news, and I just knew I had to go there. But what I witnessed there was just far beyond what I could ever imagine. It was like this post-apocalyptic horror sci-fi movie or something. There was government cars driving around, and it was just so surreal. And then these containers totally crammed with dead bodies everywhere, and you could smell them everywhere. Some of them were obviously rotting, and I was just, even though this is my own country, I was horrified to see that there are actually so many farms in Denmark. There's these roads in this part of Denmark where they're just side by side, all the way as far as I can see. There's just mink farms everywhere, side by side, and it's just horrific.
So Michael Monberg, you are the co-founder of Denmark's Vegan Party, and it's an honor to meet you. I think I met you when I was in Denmark last year at A Cube of Truth. Is this, now I'm not pointing the finger, we do horrible things to animals here. Cows, pigs, chickens, goats, and lambs, the worst. Behind closed doors where nobody can see them, and try to criminalize anybody who goes in and photographs it. But what is Denmark's emotional reaction to this? Is it shame? Is it outrage? What is happening in Denmark?
I think we see some strong things and we see some weak points as well. One thing is that a lot of people who are like animal lovers are suddenly rising and saying, "Okay, we got to stop this this crazy stuff." On the other hand, a lot of the mink farmers themselves, they in the beginning they weren't really saying very much, but now they've come out with these, in-tear stories about their whole life work and their families' businesses now being destroyed. Now they can't have a proper Christmas. All of these sickening stories about animal abusers begging for mercy from the public. So I think we are seeing the public split in two sides. One that supports the mink farmers, who buys into their personal tragic stories. And then the other part of the population that says, we didn't know it was this bad. If it really looks like this, then we got to stop. We thought it was China who massacred and abused the animals. Now we see that we do it ourselves. Let's stop it.
So Bonnie Clapper, as a former prosecutor who has taken down cartels, and your reputation precedes you, you are legendary in that front. Instead of the human race saying nobody needs to wear a fur coat, let's just end this horrific, horrific industry, what they're doing now is saying we need biosecurity at mink farms. We've got to make sure that we keep producing this, and so we'll have people walking around in suits. What is your reaction to that as a global government reaction? Absurd.
I've often likened the factory farming system to drug cartels. And the only way to take down a drug cartel is to hit it in its profits. The only way to shut down factory farming is to take the profit out of the industry. In what we're seeing now is, I think, three separate approaches, at least in the United States. One is the approach that, in China, for example, I was in China not that long ago, before the outbreak. I was working at a dog shelter called No Dogs Left Behind. Next door was a pig factory farm. When the virus hit, what did China do? It didn't put an end to animal agriculture. It ordered all animal agriculture outside the city of Beijing, and it had to move where it would present less risk to humans and be more hidden. So I feel like what's happening in Denmark is amazing in that the truth is being exposed. But I'm troubled that the response might simply be, well, let's just move this elsewhere where there's less risk to humans, of course, forgetting about the workers that are exposed. It also reminds me very much about the practice of ventilation shutdown, which Direct Action Everywhere exposed several months ago. Iowa Select, Smithfield, their solution to the mass outbreak of COVID amongst their workers and in the country was to massacre huge amounts of pigs through a horrific killing method, but not to question the validity of this system itself. In fact, Smithfield has now amped up pig purchasing so that they can get to the same levels of pig production before. And I'm also legal counsel to a group in New York called Slaughter Free NYC. We've been pointing out that these wet markets, live markets in New York, present the very same risk to both animals and humans that the Danish mink farms present, that the Iowa Select and Smithfield pig farms present. Only in New York, these 70 are in the city of New York, in the 5 boroughs. What has been the response to the governor, from Governor Cuomo, from de Blasio, from Commissioner Ball, who is the head of Department of Agriculture in New York? The response has been to hide it, either to ignore it or to pay as little attention as possible in the hopes that the problem will just go away if no attention is paid to it. We found in New York City wet markets H2N2 flu, which Dr. Desmond will tell you caused one of the worst pandemics in the world. Yet the city and the state's response has been to hide it, to ignore it, to deny its existence. And I liken that to what's happening in Denmark. There'll be a great reveal. Millions of minks will be killed. In the end, the mink farmers will just move their production a little bit more out of the public view and amp up and buy more mink. So it seems to me that humans aren't learning.
Yeah, we want to bring in Dr. Jim Desmond, who is in Liberia. This is a global video you're watching. Denmark, New York, LA, Liberia. Dr. Desmond, what is your take, given what Bonnie said, that this could be a problem, these mutations of COVID that spread from humans to animals and back to humans, or vice versa, that could affect more animals beyond just mink?
Well, exactly. I think this what's happening with the mink is a close in look at a larger problem. So animal farming happens throughout the world, whether it's industrial agriculture or there's a lot of wildlife farming in places like China. The group I work with in New York called EcoHealth Alliance, we've done a lot of work trying to study wildlife trade, wildlife crime, and in places where there is wildlife farming, there's this huge risk of. So what's happening in Denmark specifically is, yes, it's something we call a sort of a spillback event. So there's a spillover event where diseases that are in animals or wildlife, they spill over into the human population. Now that happens because human behavior, whether it's through farming or hunting or just encroaching on wild spaces, we're coming in closer and closer contact and coming into contact with animals that we wouldn't have come in contact with otherwise. So these animals, wild animals, have co-evolved with microorganisms and pathogens that could have a potential impact on human health, right? So that's exactly what's happening with the coronavirus. You had a graphic just a few seconds ago that showed SARS and MERS, COVID, HIV, all these different diseases that have jumped from animals into the human population. And then when that happens, the viruses themselves or the pathogens can then change and mutate. So what we're seeing here with the mink is that human beings get infected. The coronavirus, COVID-19, most likely came from bats, as there's a lot of evidence that there's a wide diversity of coronaviruses in bats in southern China and Southeast Asia. This particular one, these events are happening all the time, but it's only every once in a great while where a disease gets into the human population that causes both significant disease and is highly contagious, like this coronavirus. And then what we're seeing, it's not just the mink. So the mink, what's happened with the mink is that the workers on the farms have infected the mink, and then because the mink have a different immune system, it might mutate and then could change enough to then reinfect humans with a strain that might be more contagious or more dangerous. But other animals have been infected as well. There were stories at the very beginning at the Bronx Zoo that tigers were infected. Household cats have been infected. But the difference with the mink is that they're the only ones who seem to have been infected from humans and then reinfected humans with a slightly different strain. But if you take a big picture view, human beings, our relationship with animals and with the planet is the problem. The way we are interacting with the planet, the way we're interacting with wildlife, whether it's industrial farming or wildlife farming or extractive industries where we're destroying habitat, and then those wild animals need a new place to live, and then they might, because they're stressed out, they might live in a place where there's human beings, and because they're under stress, they might be shedding virus. So I think that's the big picture, is that human behavior is the problem here, and the way we're going about doing things, whether it's mink farming or wildlife farming or these other activities we're doing, are creating these problems. And these problems aren't going to go away if we keep doing things the way we're doing them.
And it's even happening here in LA. We're in a battle to say want to destroy, and it's home to 1,700 species, some threatened and some endangered. And it's happening here in possibly the most environmentally progressive city in the world, where people come up with catchphrases like, this is a restoration, and then they want to destroy the whole thing with 1,700 species in there at a time when what you just said, Dr. Desmond, is that we've got to reinvent our relationship with the natural world, or we're going to be finished. Donnie Moss in New York, one of the leading activists of Their Turn. You've heard all the folks here. What is your big takeaway as to what is really going on? Is the human race improving at all in this coronavirus crisis? Are they connecting the dots?
I haven't seen really very much public discourse about the connection between this pandemic and animal agriculture, our consumption of animals, and this pandemic. And I think, for years we've talked about the problems of animal agriculture, greenhouse gas emissions leading to climate change. Animal agriculture causes ocean dead zones, species extinction, deforestation. I mean, we were all watching the news, was it a year or two ago, when the Amazon was being cut down so that there's space for cattle grazing.
Still cut down. And we're doing a fundraiser this week on the Pantanal, the world's largest wetlands in Brazil, that's being set on fire for cattle grazing. Continue.
So I think the point here is that, the pandemic risk is yet one more reason for us to, as a society, to shut down animal agriculture, and also, as Dr. Desmond said, to reevaluate our relationship with nature. Instead of encroaching upon the Amazon and the Pantanal, instead of going into hunting, where all of these places where we're interacting with animals, where the viruses that they harbor can spill over into us, we should just stop it. We don't have to do any of these things in order to survive. We could all right now make a decision to stop consuming wild animals and farmed animals, both of which put us at risk for zoonotic disease transmission in the pandemic we're experiencing right now. We could all just shift to a pandemic-free, humane, healthy, eco-friendly lifestyle by just not eating animals. It's so simple. The solution is right in front of us.
And the New York Times recently did a report documenting how severe meat and dairy is on the planet. But they said that the study they were reporting on didn't even look at the possibility of how to reverse climate change by a global vegan response, because they wanted to stay within the realm of realism. There's a solution right there staring you in the face when you won't study it because you've made a determination based on your life experience that that's not realistic. Michael, getting back to Denmark, I was in Denmark last year, and I'd always viewed my fantasy of Denmark was it was like a hyper environmental everybody. And I will say, with the recycling, way to go. You are definitely there. But I was very astounded by the emphasis on meat and dairy, and that was very much embedded in the culture. But I just visited for a few days. What's your take?
Well, Denmark is the per capita, the pig country of the world. We produce more pigs than any other country in the world per capita. We have one of the world's largest mink industries. We are one of the worst countries of destroying nature and our own environment. Now, Denmark is a very small country. So looking at climate, of course, you could put the US and China and Russia first. But if everybody lived like a Danish citizen, the world would be gone many, many years ago.
And Casper, what is your thought? You're an incredible animal activist on the ground there, really doing amazing work. And you brought us the video that we're going to show part 2 of. In fact, let's show part 2, and then we'll talk to you about your emotional reaction to this very sad event. And is there the law of unintended consequences? Is there some kind of light at the end of the tunnel where finally people wake up, given this almost, horror movie-like atrocity? 17 million mink massacred. Casper, first of all, thank you for bringing us that extraordinary video. I know you took a lot of risks to get it, and it just breaks my heart. What are your thoughts about what the human race will learn from this atrocity, unspeakable atrocity?
Thank you so much. It's a really tough question. We should learn from this, but I don't know if we actually do. I think that we humans just have to learn the really, really, really hard way. And hopefully this is the hard way. To mink farmers in Denmark, I think this is the hard way, and they have to learn something, but they will probably forget. If they get the chance to start up again, they will probably do it. But right now, I hope that they have learned the lesson the hard way. And thank you, Donnie, for what you said about. But I've been thinking about when you hear about these horrible catastrophes, nature catastrophes with humans, like a tsunami or an earthquake or something, and you have to save a lot of humans and relocate them into areas where they are crammed together. The first thing you always talk about is, oh my God, now we will have all these horrible diseases in these humans. We have to help them. But at the same time, we do it systematically with animals, and we never talk about these horrible diseases that happens. We just pump them full of antibiotics, and then they develop the resistance for the antibiotics, and it just goes on, and no one talks about it. It's just the normal thing to do. And now I think that we see the horrible consequences of that decision, of that normal institutionalized pandemic breeding environment that we have created, that we cannot, we cannot look away. We have to face it. And I don't know if everyone will learn from it, but it's something that we can always, in the future, we can point at what happened in Denmark. We can talk about it, and it will probably I'm sure it will happen again with other diseases, all this disease in other farms and other areas in the world. And then
I want to jump in on that, Casper, because you raised a really good point. And I want to ask Bonnie as well as Dr. Desmond, but before we get to the medical issue with Dr. Desmond, Bonnie, this is so obvious to us. I love the title of the book, The Best and the Brightest, because it was a sarcastic title. What did the best and the brightest bring us? The Vietnam War. The best and the brightest are reporting on this pandemic and never talking, virtually ever, about the connection between abuse of animals. This first cropped up amongst people who had visited a wet market in China, a retail slaughter market. And we showed how all of these pandemics stem from animals and our abuse of animals. They don't talk about it. And they don't talk about animal agriculture's massive impact on climate change. They come up with these, let's have the animals graze, to just these fraudulent concepts to try to justify animal agriculture. I mean, and we're barreling towards extinction. Very possible. It's very possible for the human race to go extinct. We're not exempt from natural laws. Bonnie, as somebody who's in there in the trenches fighting David and Goliath battles, do you see a breaking point where the powers that be, the New York Times, CNN, NPR, the media, start recognizing that this is the problem and we have to change?
It's very sad to say, Jane, and Donnie will back me up on this because he's probably sent out more press emails than I have. I think we were joking that we were like 42,150 to 3 in terms of responses. If we can't get the media, the governor, the mayor to pay attention to this issue, in the epicenter of the disease in the United States, at least in March and April, New York City, what will make them pay attention? If we can't get the media and the politicians, it seems to me that we're always playing catch up. We have to wait for another outbreak in the center of New York. Maybe we'll call it the Cuomo virus or the de Blasio virus. I'm sure you've all heard about that horrible wet market called Kapuros. This year, it operated the same as before, with police protection provided by the mayor. These videos show the horrors of Kaporos. Thousands and thousands of practitioners, not a mask in sight, yet the government did nothing. And it is terrifying to think that after all we've suffered and all the animals have suffered as a result of this COVID outbreak, that none of the politicians are acting proactively. They're simply trying to find a vaccination for this one, but nobody seems really to be thinking about how to protect the next one. And the only way, as everyone here has pointed out, the only way to protect humanity from the next pandemic, which could kill many more people, is to end the abuse and use of animals. Yet,
and yet we're sort of discarded as fringe and extremists. You're a former prosecutor. I'm a former mainstream journalist and author. Dr. Desmond is a veterinarian and an infectious disease expert. Michael is a leader of a co-founder of a party in a political party in Denmark. Donnie Moss is a documentarian. We're not fringe. We are talking right now to 70 people because we're desperate to get the word out. And hopefully those people will share this out. It's like when you're living in a totalitarian society and you print up little flyers and you hand them to people on the street, hoping you don't get caught.
We even did that in New York. In New York, Slaughter Free and the Alliance to End Kaporos printed up posters with de Blasio's image and the images of Kaporos and the link. And what was the city's response? They tore down the posters. So I don't know what it will take to get politicians to pay attention. You know, Donnie's approach is a fantastic one. I met Donnie 2.5 years ago. I'd been a vegetarian for years, 5 minutes in conversation with Donnie. I'm a vegan and a vegan activist. So each one of us has to work and use our personal skills to, I'm not saying to convince, to show, to demonstrate to people like us that we aren't all sort of goofy vegan activists. We are all just like everyone else, yet we have made a positive decision to change our lives, not just for ourselves, but for the rest of the world. So I don't want to discount human interaction, human outreach, but without a political will, and I liken it again to the drug wars. There's no war on drugs. It's a huge military complex, an industrial complex. It's a business, it's an industry, and the governments make money and the traffickers make money. It's no different here. Without a political will, we're going to see one pandemic after another. And I just don't want the 6 of us to have to say 20 years from now,
if we're alive.
Exactly. I told you so.
Yeah. And just before we get too depressed, I want to talk about one positive development. McDonald's just unveiled a meatless burger, McPlant, that is going to debut next year. They say millions served, billions served. This could be billions saved. Dr. Desmond, that's why I say the society is schizophrenic. On one level, it's barreling towards something, but once they see something starts to make money, like Beyond Meat, the most successful initial public offering since the 2008 financial crisis, at the time it came out, suddenly, if we can make money, maybe it's okay, which I'll take it. I'll take it, any win whatsoever. Dr. Desmond, so we're looking big picture, because when I first was told, Donnie said, do this. And I said, yes, it was a punch to the stomach reading 17 million make your mind can't even process it. But then Donnie said, this could possibly spell the end of all concentrated animal farm, in quotes, operations, because the underlying problem is that these animals are kept in such horrific conditions that it's a breeding ground for disease. And indeed, I've read reports that in China, there is a swine flu that has jumped from the pigs to the workers. The only question is it jumping from worker to worker? So where do you see factory farming fitting into this equation, Dr. Desmond, as an infectious disease expert?
Well, factory farming is a huge problem. And one of the biggest problems with factory farming is the overuse of antibiotics. So there's widespread use of antibiotics in animals, largely not to even protect them from disease, but mainly to help them gain weight. So with cattle, for example, injecting with antibiotics helps them gain weight faster. But the flip side of that is that it creates antibiotic resistance. And so there's been a steady increase in antibiotic resistance across all types of bacteria across the world, to the point where we're running out of antibiotics to treat. There's some that will be, like everyone's heard of MRSA, that's a staph infection that is completely resistant to almost all antibiotics. And this will keep happening as this intensification of agriculture, so industrial agriculture. And then, the same thing's happening with the mink and other wildlife farming, where intensification, animals are stressed. When animals are stressed, so think of yourself, like when you're stressed out, it's easier to get sick, right? You get a cold. Well, when animals are under stress, so chickens or mink or wildlife being kept in difficult conditions where they're treated badly, disease spreads more quickly. So any of these situations, whether it's a virus or whether it's bacteria, it creates conditions where there's a higher risk of diseases spreading beyond just the farm itself. So you brought up the point about the swine flu. There was a massive earlier this year, maybe it was last year, there was African swine fever that spread from China all over the world. Now that does not affect humans, but imagine if that were an influenza that then jumps into the human population, So all these conditions, and these things keep happening. So that's the other big picture thing. Like we've looked at, the past, 50 to 60 years of data. There's been a steady increase in these spillover events, and it's going to keep increasing. I mean, you keep hearing about them all the time, and there's been a lot of near misses. I mean, H1N1 in 2009, there was SARS in 2003, there's MERS that's ongoing. So these near misses that you think, okay, it's no big deal. Even this coronavirus, even though it's been terrible and there's been a lot of loss of life, it could have been a lot worse. And the next one might be a lot worse. The current mortality rate is pretty low relative to some other diseases. So if this had been SARS, tens or hundreds of millions of people would be dying rather than a little over 1 million. So I don't want to minimize the loss of life of human beings, but my point is that if we continue on the track that we're going on with the way we're treating the planet, the way we're treating animals, the way we're farming animals, there's just going to be a steady increase of these spillover events that could lead to pandemics. So by acting the way we're acting, our human behaviors, we're putting ourselves at risk down the road.
So basically, I don't want to exaggerate what you're saying. You're saying essentially there could be a worse pandemic, a pandemic that's even worse. When this first started, I happened to be at home flipping around and I came upon a great course, and it was about the plague in the 14th century in Europe that wiped out at least a third of the population. And it was harrowing to watch because I had just learned that, there's a pandemic here. It's just accidental that I watched it. And there's so many commonalities, people fleeing the city, the wealthier people fleeing, thinking that they'd escape, but actually it ended up going into the interior. It just took longer than reaching the port cities because the pandemic, the plague was going faster by boat than it was by land, but it eventually got there by land. And, the parallels were unbelievable. The reaction, some people actually wearing masks. Yes, they had masks with beaks and other people not. And it was, they said things like, people were great at 11 o'clock in the morning and they were dead at 4. So that was an example, just to follow up, Dr. Desmond, of a much more virulent strain or a virulent type of a deadlier type of pandemic. You're saying something like that could happen?
Of course. I mean, if you just look throughout history, you just gave one example, but there was the Spanish flu in 1918. There's just example after example of diseases coming into the human population when they're new, like this coronavirus. That's the reason it spread so quickly. It's a novel disease that enters the human population. And since no one has immunity to it, it spreads, and this one is quite contagious. It spreads very rapidly around the world. And because we're so interconnected now, you can hop on a plane, you could be in Shanghai and then you hop on a plane, and 14 hours later you're in New York City, two of the most densely populated places on the planet, and it can boom, and then it's everywhere. I mean, that's pretty much what happened with this coronavirus. And if this had been a disease that had a higher mortality rate, I mean, as terrible as it was, it could have been a lot worse. Like I was saying with SARS, SARS has a 10% mortality rate. MERS, I think, has a maybe 25% mortality rate. They're just not as contagious. But the next one could be more contagious. So I think that's what people need to be. I just keep hoping that this is a wake-up call to politicians, like Bonnie was saying, but just the world in general, that these events are going to keep happening unless we change the way we do things. And the other thing is the economic impact. I mean, this is costing the global economy trillions and trillions of dollars. People are losing their businesses and their livelihoods. And all it would take is for us as humans to change the way we do things, invest in public health infrastructure, invest in sort of the surveillance that needs to be done to make sure we protect ourselves, but also protect the species that we share the planet with, against the risk, reduce the risk of these things happening in the future.
But what it takes ultimately, if we're really thinking about it, is for the human race to stop eating animals, stop wearing animals, stop exploiting animals, stop killing animals. And that is the one thing that people are very resistant to do. And, Dr. Melanie Joy coined the term carnism, and she just coined the phrase carnistic privilege. And what she brilliantly described it as is all privilege is regarding a minor inconvenience as a major violation of human rights, of their rights. So any privilege has that underlying strain to it. So let me ask Bonnie Clapper. Okay, you're a former prosecutor. You were in the system. You're not some outlier who's just, living in a forest. You were there in the biggest courtrooms and arguing with the prosecution, with the government. We have now, obviously, a change in administration. There's a new look at this pandemic. We know, for example, that there are members of the Senate, like Cory Booker, who is a vegan, who is trying to get the message out that, look, the underlying problem here is that you can't humanely or even in a safe way produce 70 billion animals every year for 7.8 billion humans to eat. You can't produce 50 million mink for people in China and in Hong Kong. Those are the biggest consumers to wear. Just a couple of tweaks of that dial could end all of these problems, not to mention reverse climate change and human world hunger, deforestation, habitat extinction, habitat destruction, wildlife extinction, and reduce health problems like heart disease and cancer, which are primarily diet related, in at least especially when it comes to heart disease, stroke, etc. When are they going to connect the dots? Because we only have a certain amount of time left. I did a documentary that's on Amazon Prime that anybody can watch called Countdown to Year Zero, which posits that we have 6 years, now it's 5 years, before virtually all wildlife vertebrates are wiped out. And that's going to trigger an ecological collapse. So 5 years. We got 5 years to wake up. Or we're finished. We could be finished as a species. If it's too hot to walk across the street, there's nothing. There's no business. There's no commerce. There's no nothing.
I have found both in my years as a prosecutor and the last 8 years as criminal defense attorney, humans are motivated by two things: greed and need. And you have to address both of them. Many of the people I represent now aren't engaging in criminal activity simply out of greed, it's out of need. Others simply just want more. So if we're going to address this problem, we have to take the profit out of these industries, but we also have to provide for those who are disenfranchised, isn't the exact word, but I think you understand what I'm saying. I mean, I look at Michael and Casper, those farm workers, mink farm workers in Denmark, the owners of the farms. They may be willing to stop. They may not clamor to reintroduce the mink as a product if there's alternatives for them. I liken it to the cocoa reduction efforts in certain countries in South and Central America. If you don't want people to pick coca, you have to give them another crop to pick. So hand in hand with education and with financial penalties on industries like the agriculture industry that are destroying the environment, you have to give both the workers and the owners some other way to provide for themselves. It's very much like what Slaughter Free NYC does. We do worker outreach. We try to reach the workers at these wet markets and help them find other jobs, because if you simply close down these 70 wet markets, a lot of people will be unemployed. So if we focus on those two things, greed and need, we can find a solution. The problem, unfortunately, is that it's a lot easier to deal with the greed. It's a lot easier in the farming industry, in the drug industry, to simply say, we make a lot of money, therefore there's no need for change. Because Americans in particular, but humans worldwide, think in very short, no one's thinking 20 years from now, 10 years from now, they're thinking tomorrow. Am I going to be able to buy this new car? Am I going to be able to put my kid through private school? So we have to have a dual approach. Penalize those industries, try to shut them down, but at the same time, offer alternatives. Otherwise, I think the six of us, if we're still alive 10 years from now, will be doing a very similar live stream. But all of that takes a political will. And certainly the world as it is today, and under the hopefully outgoing administration, there isn't that political will. With the new administration, I see some hope.
Donnie Moss, you've been fighting this fight and you have won David and Goliath battles. Do you see a point where maybe it's about reaching the, as you really study, just like a handful of people control the majority of wealth in this country, it's not even political, because ultimately this is a consumer decision. First of all, the one way we could solve all of this is for people to stop buying fur, even fur trim, okay? Even Canada Goose fur trim, and stop eating animals. And it's never been easier. Again, I point to now they're going to start selling it in 2021 at McDonald's, plant lettuce and tomato. So I see the consumer shifting taste, because then I think the other thing, Donnie, is to reach the big business leaders, the heads of the big tech companies, the heads of the big hedge funds, the heads of the big banks, and say, look, this isn't making money anymore. It's costing everybody money. It's destroying the economy. Yeah, sure, there's a tiny percentage of people who are benefiting, but the vast majority of people, it's unsustainable. We've got greater wealth inequality than during the Roaring 20s, than during the royal courts right before revolutions. Okay, so this is not a sustainable model. Maybe we could get to the top leaders, like, I don't know, I'll throw it off the top of my head. Michael Bloomberg, okay? People like that who, the head of Google, the head of Amazon. I mean, those people, 3 or 4 or 5 people who get this could actually make the change, along with the billions of consumers just saying, I don't want to participate.
Jane, some of the people you mentioned are actually investing in these plant-based meat companies because, probably because it's profitable and probably because they want to be good corporate citizens. But when Bill Gates was recently interviewed on a big podcast recently and asked directly about the impact of animal agriculture on climate change, he bridged to another subject because he was so uncomfortable addressing that topic. Unfortunately, that's a reality we have to address. And so we have to reach people. Bonnie said, referenced different approaches to reach people. As when I'm doing outreach, I look to see what motivates people. Some people are motivated by their health. Some people are motivated by the planet because they have children and grandchildren. And some people are motivated by ethics. And I think most people, if asked, would describe themselves as animal lovers. And if we take the time to expose them to what really happens behind closed doors on mink farms, on factory farms that raise animals for food, then I think we can change hearts and minds. Mother Nature has, with this pandemic, basically said to all of us, the whole human race, Go to your room. This is a timeout. Think about what you've done. And, you know, and the hope here, and I haven't seen evidence of this yet, is that there will be more thought given to the way we live our lives. You know, Dr. Desmond, I watched a National Geographic special about a week ago called Virus Hunters. And you have people like Dr. Desmond in Liberia who are out, you know, in dangerous places trying to research and prevent zoonotic diseases from emerging and spilling over into humans. But at the end of the day, scientists can only go so far. We have to change our own behavior for the sake of our own health, for the sake of the planet, and for the sake of the animals. And let's see how much more disruption needs to take place in all of our lives before we actually make these changes.
Absolutely. And I want to point out, as we're speaking now, the virus is skyrocketing, and it's the worst it's ever been. I mean, when we first heard about this, I heard about it in early March. Then I thought, well, a couple of months, and now we're actually going the wrong direction. So, Michael, you are in Denmark, and I've always regarded Europe as far ahead of the United States when it comes to environmental issues, recycling. Do you see this conversation happening? For example, a couple of years ago, I was in Berlin. It was like a vegan paradise. I went to Vegans. Every restaurant had multitude of vegan options. There were cruelty-free stores. There were many vegan restaurants. I thought, wow, Europe is leading the way. Where are we in Europe on this topic?
In general, I think Denmark is one of the worst countries when it comes to protecting the environment. You mentioned Berlin, for example, Germany. They are way ahead in vegan options and restaurants and stuff like that. Sweden as well. Here in Copenhagen, it's fairly good, but if you go just outside of Copenhagen, it's a meat and potatoes country, and a lot of Europe is still that. If you look at the French food culture, you know, it's about what horrific things you can do to an animal in order to eat it. If you think about foie gras and other foodstuffs like that. In Spain, we still have bullfighting going on. Here in Denmark, you shouldn't leave your dog outside the supermarket because it'll get stolen and probably used for a dog kennel or for breeding, or even for, as you know, meat for fighting dogs. So everywhere in the world, Europe, anywhere, carnism is going strong, and we just have to keep on fighting.
So, Casper, as we wrap up, because we could talk about this all day, and once again, I want to say that the tragic irony of this is that we're doing this on social media because we're doing anything we can to get the word out. But this is the conversation that should be happening in the mainstream media and isn't. Why? You ask yourself, why? Why should I believe these people? Why? You know, if this were true, the mainstream media would be talking about it. All you need to do is look at the advertisers. Meat, dairy, pharmaceuticals. Because if people were plant-based, they wouldn't need the cholesterol-lowering drugs. Since animals produce cholesterol, there's no cholesterol in plant-based products. Heart disease kills, well, COVID aside, it's a leading killer. Aside from COVID, 1 out of every 4 people dies of heart disease. It's arteries to the heart getting clogged with plaque, which comes from cholesterol. You know, processed meat is officially cancer causing. Red meat is declared a likely carcinogen. I could go on and on and on. The entire system is set up to get people sick because you can make money treating them. And what we're talking about is prevention. We're talking about preventing the next pandemic. We're talking about preventing all these diseases, reversing climate change. So the health system and the medical system and this pandemic, they're all focused on how do we fix it once it's broken? And we're talking about how do we prevent it from getting broken in the first place? And so I want to get final thoughts from everybody. Dr. Desmond, you would probably be the best to address that question.
Yeah, I think again, I just go back. I just keep with all this this whole year with the coronavirus. I mean, I've been doing this work for a long time, and the people like me who do this kind of work, we've been talking about something like this happening, that it could happen, that it will happen, and now that it's happened, I just keep hoping that people, it's like a wake-up call to the planet, because it's not just this coronavirus. Again, this is going to keep happening unless we change the way we do things. Obviously, climate change is, I mean, it should be so obvious to everyone that with the fires and with the increase in hurricanes, I mean, with the coastal flooding when there's not even a storm going on, these are symptoms of a much larger problem. And the larger problem is human beings and the way we're currently doing business right now as human beings, our behaviors are creating these problems. And these problems are only going to get worse unless we change the way we do things. So I think when Donnie was talking, when you were talking about the plant-based meat, I think people are open to change. I mean, even here in Liberia, the small little country in West Africa, we work with people to try and get them to stop eating bushmeat, and the market workers who sell the bushmeat, and they're open to change if they have an alternative. That we've already had several market women. So this is very small scale, but I think we have to be thinking locally to get people to change things and convince people. And everywhere I've been in the world doing this kind of work, where I work with people who are, out hunting animals or in doing wildlife trade, because I'm interested in the public health side and the disease side. But even in China, there's a growing animal welfare movement there. Younger people care about animals. People love animals. If they knew how badly animals were treated, and they don't see it, but I mean, people, if they had the alternative to eat something besides animals, I think they would happily do it, because every little kid loves animals, and most adults do as well. So I think that's where we're heading. It's just, I feel like it's a race against time to get people to wake up and switch their behaviors to try and change these things. And that's sort of what it feels like right now. So that's what we need to do, is just change the way we're going about our business.
All right. Well, final thoughts, Donnie Moss.
Look, if pandemics don't shut down wet markets, live animal markets, factory farms, slaughterhouses, then I think ultimately lab-grown meat, which won't require animals being raised, might. And the question is, will that happen in time, or will we have already, or will we be past the point of no return? I guess on a final note, I would like to say, it's easy for us as humans to look back on atrocities committed by the people who came before us. The trick is to really look at what we're doing right now. What will future generations look back on? And I think that the big thing will be factory farms and slaughterhouses. One day people are going to look back and say, what were you doing while that was happening? Did you speak out? What bigger atrocity is there on the planet right now than slaughterhouses? They don't need to exist.
All right, Michael.
Yeah, well, I think that we can use a lot of different methods to get people to approach veganism. I started myself because of climate and environment, but I stuck to it because of ethics. So I think a very important thing here is the industry, they will make up a mink that doesn't pollute. They'll make up medicine that can keep us healthy. They'll make up, all these products that makes us feel good. But the problem is, when we see a pig that doesn't pollute, everybody will just eat that instead. So we have to get ethics on the table at all times. Get them hooked by, talking about the artificial meat or how they can make money or something like that. But we need ethics to lead the way, because we need people to turn vegan. Otherwise, this won't stick at all. So that's my view on it.
Bonnie?
I agree with everything everyone has said here, and it does go back to a combination of individual outreach, political will, offering substitutes for people, whether it's another way to make a living or something else to eat that's good for them. But in the end, I think ethics is extremely important. When you look at any Holocaust, when you look at what happened in Rwanda and Nazi Germany, when you look at what's happening in the factory farms today, doing what you do, Jane, revealing, showing the truth, there's nothing more powerful than that. I have friends who sadly are not vegan, and I try to get them to watch this stuff, and they don't want to see it. And when they say, I don't want to look, I say, why? And they say, I'll have to change my habits then.
Mm-hmm.
So continuing education like this is extremely powerful because, as you've all said, when confronted with the reality, most kind, ethical human beings will want to change.
Very well said. Casper, you got us that extraordinary video and photos. So you get the final word.
No, thank you so much. I agree with all of you, and I always say to people that find out what you're good at and then do more of that. So thank you to all of you for doing what you're doing, because I couldn't do what you're doing. So please continue to do that, and then I'll do my stuff. And I think we actually should just fight this in every way possible, target it in any way possible. There's not one solution to stop animal agriculture and animal abuse. And my final thoughts on this subject is that I see both some concerns and I also see a light at the end of the tunnel. But what we're seeing right now in Denmark is, as Michael started out saying, is that we are portraying these farmers. I have never seen so many men crying on TV as this very moment in Denmark, and it's mink farmers crying, and they get the media, they get the attention, they get to tell their stories. And it has actually changed how Danish population is viewing the mink industry. Before this pandemic, which obviously should end the mink industry, Danish people were actually against mink farming. But after this has happened, Danish people are pro mink farming because of these farmers' stories, and that's a great concern to me. But on the other side, I see a light at the end of the tunnel, because this fur industry is cornered right now. They are not allowed to breed and kill minks next year in Denmark, which is wonderful. Denmark is the largest producer of mink on the entire planet, so that's a great thing. And so many other countries in Europe has already banned fur, and people are talking about, well, then the production of mink will just move to Poland, but Poland is also banning fur. So this industry is cornered right now, and I'm sure that they will find solution to continue, but they are struggling right now, and that gives me a light at the end of the tunnel. But that's just one out of many horrible industries that needs to stop. But I think it's a good idea to take them one by one. And we can always, when we move to the next industry, we can point at, but this is exactly like the mink industry. It's exactly what happened there. And we all agreed on that had to stop, and it stopped. So now we are moving on to this next industry.
Well, I agree everything you're saying. Absolutely. And I would urge you safely, with social distancing and use of social media, for you guys in Denmark to double down on this, because you've got the momentum and people are their eyes and their ears are open. You have a window of opportunity, and I would definitely hit it really hard with your incredible videos. And I got to tell you, I know how hard it is to go and record this. It is a punch to the gut. It is, thank you, heroic work to get that video, but definitely get it out there and use this leverage. It's leverage to open people's minds and hearts. And the last thing I will say is, I've always believed firmly in the law of unintended consequences. I will say personally that after fighting and struggling to get people to open their minds to a plant-based diet, when Beyond Meat went public, everybody's attitude changed. Suddenly I wasn't that weirdo. I was somebody who was on the cutting edge of a profitable technology. Not that I'm involved, but their whole attitude changed. I could see it with my neighbors. They'd walk up to me, hey, that Beyond Meat, huh? So I feel that with things like the plant-based burger going into McDonald's, that's a huge game changer. It just happened this week. Things can change very rapidly. We are in a David and Goliath battle when it comes to eating animals, when it comes to wearing animals. But I do feel that we have momentum now. We've just got to double down because this is a window of opportunity to wake up the world. And the last thing I'll say, it's a consumer issue. If you are upset by any of the images that you have seen today, don't wear them, don't eat them, and share this video out. So thank you so much, everybody, for an incredible conversation. You're all my heroes. Have a good
Thanks
one.
for having us.
Bye.
Bye. Be safe.
Thank you.